Well, good morning. That was kind of weak. Good morning. We're so glad that you're here at both the end of a crazy week and the beginning of another crazy week. Lots of things going on this week. Of course, the revival up at Hiawassee. We hope that everybody will take an opportunity to be up there. That's Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. Also this evening during the 6 o'clock service. I know the van is going to leave here both Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night at 4:45. They're going to stop and have dinner on the way up and then be there for revival. Butch will be speaking tonight, David Decker on Monday. I'll be speaking on Tuesday, and then Butch will close it out on Wednesday. So please take an opportunity. If you've never been to Hiawassee and you live in Ellijay, you're missing out. It's a beautiful ride up to Towns County and that area and Lake Chateau, really beautiful place, and a lot of really good people that worship there. So if you have an opportunity, please make it up this week. I want to take a minute or two at the beginning of our time this morning to just say a big thank you. Last week was our Friends and Family Day, 375 people here together and a ton of visitors, and they didn't just show up. You guys had to invite them and encourage them to be here, so thank you for that. Thank you for everybody that cooked so much food. There was a ton of food here and just was really good. Everything went smoothly. Everybody had a good time, so thank you for that, for inviting folks, for helping with the cooking, and for making sure that went smoothly. And also this week for the Reach campaign. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, all excellent time together. Lots of work that went into making sure that food was there and classes were taught, and we had greeters and people doing registration, and it was like a well-oiled machine. Everything was great, and we were so appreciative of all the people that were there to hear those messages. And so for all your input and help with both Family and Friends Day and Reach, I'd like to get up here and read you a name-by-name list of everybody that helped, but it was a group effort, and so thank you so much on behalf of myself and the elders, who I'm sure will talk at the end of service about it. Thank you so much for all the work that you put in. And if you're like me, you were highly affected this week by the lessons, by this focus on family. And I've called the lesson this morning Time in a Bottle, and I found this image on one of the royalty-free image sites, and I don't know, I just feel like that a lot lately. When you go through and you look, you feel like that you're trapped in this never-ending cycle of day in and day out, and you just can't keep up. We wake up with a list every day of things that we've got to do, and it feels like they're just never going to get done. And we go day by day, and we grow more weary, and we just feel like that time is swallowing us up. And then we have that constant reminder in God's Word, and one of the first Bible verses that probably we learn in adulthood is James chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, where it tells us that our life is just a vapor that's here for a little while and vanishes away. So we almost have this feeling of the hamster in the wheel, constantly trying to keep up. And when I was growing up, my dad's favorite singer, and still is, was Jim Croce. And Jim Croce wrote a song, Time in a Bottle. He actually wrote it in 1970 when he found out that his wife Ingrid was pregnant with their first child. And he sat down and wrote this, and I'm going to read you the lyrics. One of my favorite songs. He says, "If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day until eternity passes away, just to spend them with you." And he's talking about his wife and his child. He says, "If I could make the days last forever, and if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again, I would spend them with you." Then the chorus, he says, "But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do when you find them." And he said, "I've looked around enough to know that you're the one I want to go through time with." And I was thinking about that song this week, that if we could just take time and we could bottle it up and we could hold it and we could ignore bills and jobs and responsibilities, and we could just pause and freeze ourselves, and we could do our favorite thing forever, what would that thing be? But then he gets back to reality in the chorus, and he says, there never seems to be enough time to do the things you actually want to do once you find them. And I felt those words this week ringing in my mind, and I was just thinking, that there's this constant feeling of time. And right now in my life, I'm in graduate school, and I'm trying to fulfill responsibilities here, and this month has just been crazy with us trying to plan all these things that are coming up and getting ready for summer. And we've got a new baby who's not such a newborn anymore, and we've got all these responsibilities, and it's just life just is constantly coming at you, and you're trying to make sure the things you actually want to do, the things that you would love to do, there's just no time to do them. On Tuesday night, and I've asked Will and Nathan to cue up this illustration. Andrew Itson brought an illustration using marbles in a jar, and I want to share it with you. It's about 2 minutes long, and if y'all can dim these lights, and we'll let you watch these, and then I want to talk about it just a little bit.
In this jar right now are 936 marbles. From the day your child is born to the day they leave your home to go off to college, it's 936 weeks. This jar represents birth to 18. This is how much time we have with our children. Now, when you see this, I want you to understand, I'm not trying to make an emotional pull, and I'm not just trying to make you sad and make all you mamas out there cry. But what I am trying to do is to do something that Moses in this song actually described as wisdom, and it's this. He said, we need to teach ourselves to number our days so that we can have a heart of wisdom. There's a buddy of mine that in his office, after every single week on Friday, he takes one marble and puts it in another jar. And the reason why he does that is whenever he goes home is to help him understand the limited amount of time he has with his kids. And the reason why this is also significant, did you know that 2/3 of children make the decision to put on Christ in baptism before the age of 18? But we understand the reality too, don't we? We're losing our marbles. In fact, I want to show you this, if they don't fall all over the ground. That's kindergarten. That's 6th grade. And the reason why I think there's so much wisdom in numbering our days is because of two simple reasons. When you see how much time you have left, you tend to get a little bit more serious about the time you have now. And I've found myself saying this, I don't think we mean it in a bad way, but we find ourselves saying a lot of times, man, we survive those top.
Hope you were able to hear what he said there. In that jar, there were 936 marbles that were representative of the 936 weeks that we have with our children from the time they're born until the time they turn 18. 936 weeks. And I immediately, when he said that, we have an 8-month-old, and I started thinking, how many weeks are in that 8 months already? Because what Andrew said is very true. When we start to understand how little time we have, we start to realize that we have to take advantage of the time that we have in front of us. And I just think about sometimes, and I'm not trying to convict you as much as I'm just telling you from my heart this morning. I think about sometimes how much time I've wasted doing things that, although, yeah, they're good, and yeah, they're beneficial, and yeah, they're important, they were not the most important thing. Because if I could put the time in the bottle and I could say, I'm just going to do what's most important, what would that be? What is the most important thing? What matters the most? What's most significant in my life that I need to spend the most time doing? And it's just going to be 3 things this morning. Time in a bottle. The first thing is we have got to, as people, learn to put God first. There are so many things tugging at our time and trying to draw us away from what is the most important thing. That's our relationship with God. I've had a lot of conversations with people this week about the things that pull us away. And one of the things that always comes up is why we miss church services. And I don't get as bent out of shape about this as I used to. When I first started preaching, if there was somebody that wasn't there for every service every week, I was texting them and calling them and, calling them church skippers and heathens and everything else. And, if you miss services, you are still a heathen. But when it's not so much that, people are missing service, that's fine. And I think sometimes elderships and preachers especially get accused of focusing too much on numbers, even though we do count pregnant women twice every Sunday when we come to services. But it's not so much that, it's this. We meet Sunday morning for a Bible class and worship. That's 2 hours. We meet Sunday night for an hour, and we meet Wednesday night for an hour. That's 4 hours. If we can't find it within ourselves and our busy schedules to come together with the people that we're going to spend eternity with for 4 hours every week, we are missing the boat completely. We're missing what's most important. And you're not coming because the lesson's going to be dynamic and blow you away, because I hope it does sometimes, but it's not going to happen every time. And you're not going to come because the singing is going to be so angelic and so beautiful every single time that we're together that you're just caught up in a spirituality. And it's not going to be that every time we come together there's some great wisdom said, even though Rob gave us 4 beautiful points around the Lord's table this morning. Every time we come together is not going to be the most spiritually enlightening moment of your life. But it's going to show God, it's going to show our families, it's going to show our fellow Christians that in our lives, the most important thing is our relationship with God. And so to me, that is just the very tip of the iceberg. The very most basic non-negotiable thing is that when the doors of the church building are open for services, if I'm physically able, I ought to be here. That's a very basic thing. And I know that you may say, well, I have a conflict with this and a conflict with that, and I understand that, but if it's a conflict with God, then God wins. And so I think that has to be the very first thing. But it's not just a relationship with God and being here for attendance, because there are people that go to church buildings all the time who are not the least bit spiritual in their lives. There has to be an effort made to show ourselves, to show God, and to show our families that that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. I want you to think about this for a minute, and I know that a lot of you, when I say this question, are going to say, well, I do that every day, and that's good. But I'm not talking necessarily to the strongest of us this morning. I'm talking to the busiest of us this morning. And that's not a jab at retired people or anything. Retired people are sometimes the busiest people that I know. Robert Wood retired this week, and he looks so tired already after the first week of being retired. I don't know what Tammy is doing to him, but sometimes when I'm talking to the busiest among us, those of us that have demands on our time every day. I think about people like James Barr and Jennifer and Rob that drive to Atlanta every single day, and it's a 2-hour drive in traffic down there and a 2-hour drive back. And I don't see how they are able to do that. Just constant demand on their time. That's the group I'm talking to, and I include myself in that, the busiest among us. How much time do we have and how much time do we spend on spiritual things in our home? How many times do we open the Bible throughout the week and sit down with our family and say, let's sit down and look at this together? How many times do we talk about the lesson? How many times do we talk about the things that happen at church? How often do you ask your children, what was your Bible class lesson about this morning? How often do we do that? How often do we have devotionals? How often are we teaching our children church songs instead of the lyrics to Old Town Road and the horses in the back that's popular right now, right? They thought that was funny. How how diligent are we in showing our family that spiritual things are the most important? Or when we get a moment of freedom, when we get some downtime, do we go to our favorite show that's been DVR'd? Or do we, go and do our favorite activity? Do we go to the movies? Or where is our focus? And when we have that time, if we could put that time in a bottle, what would it be spent doing? So I think that we've got to, before we can do anything else in our lives, understand that our relationship with God is first. It's most important, because that is the thing that directly affects where we will spend eternity. Literally, heaven and hell rest in the balance of where we spend our time. And I hope that we'll never forget how significant that is. When I was a senior in high school, the VFW had an essay contest. And there was a singer out at the time who was actually stationed at Fort Benning at one time. His name was Craig Morgan. He's probably still doing concerts and stuff, but he had a song that was out called God, Family, and Country. And I said, well, if I'm writing an essay for the VFW, there's the title, right? And so I wrote that essay, God, Family, and Country. And it was a pretty good essay, and the folks there loved it. I won first place and got to go make this speech in front of the local VFW hall and all those things. And I really remember, I guess in my mind, maybe up until the last several years, thinking, well, that's the order of everything, right? It's God first and family second, and country and other things down. But I want us to reason through that logically. If ever in our lives we say that our family is second to anything, we have completely missed the point about what God teaches us about our families. Because not only is God first, our family is first as well. Open your Bibles up to Ephesians 5, the passage that Brent read. The context of that is fascinating. Excuse me. He says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise. This is Ephesians 5:15. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So that sounds like an exhortation from Paul there to be more spiritual, right? To take advantage of the time and to evangelize and to share the gospel with people. And I think all that is true. But as he's writing this, what comes next is the next logical step in his thinking, right? This is where his mind goes after he's talked about wasting time and being more spiritual and taking advantage of it. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Easy for him to say he's not married, right? But the first thing that he gives there is some instructions to wives. And I've heard preachers get up and read and stop right there, and that's probably real convenient, right? But listen to the next part. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does for the church. For we're members of his body. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So in all that, instruction to husbands and wives. Remember, there's no chapter divisions in the original letter, right? He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy life, that you may enjoy long life on earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So right after Paul says, don't waste time, take advantage of the time. Days are evil, time is running short, be more spiritual, live your life in praise to God. He says, all right, now that we've said that and you understand what's important and you understand why you need to be spiritual, this is the way that families ought to work together and submit themselves to God. I've heard people say over and over, I've got to make sure that I'm committed to the Lord's work. Your family is first and foremost the work that God has given you. First and foremost. That's our first mission field. That's our primary battlefield. It's within our own homes. And so we've got to figure out then, how do I make that connection where I can put God first and family first and bring those ideas together, so that God can be glorified and my family can understand why I live my life to bring him glory. And so that takes a balance. In 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a parenting workshop. First time we've ever done anything like this. Steve Wages, who is the director of the Cloverdale Center for Counseling and the youth and family guy over at Faulkner, is going to come and talk to us about how to be better parents. Parents, please tell me that you have something more important to do 2 weeks from today than to be here for that. Because if you do, you're missing this. God and our family take first priority over everything else. Having said that, I want to introduce an idea to you. That's the idea of balance. If you participated in every activity that our church has, C-Squad activities, youth activities, care teams, workshops, Georgia School of Preaching classes, Camp Watoga's 50th anniversary, the Georgia School of Preaching lectureship, those two things took place yesterday. If every time we had any single event at the church and you were there every single time for everything, you would be, first off, you'd be able to bend time because you'd be in two places at once. And secondly, you would be the busiest single human being ever. And so I'm aware, and our leadership is aware, that sometimes you have to make choices. And so I think that there has to be, out of necessity, a balance in our lives. And so what we have to do is start with, and I use this term a lot, and I hope you understand where it comes from, this idea of non-negotiables. That there are things that are not negotiable in our spiritual lives. The first of those is attendance at worship service. Unless you're sick or have some major conflict that comes up, that you know you have a sick relative to take care of, or you're on vacation and worshiping somewhere else, there is no reason to miss worship service. Now, I want to state that. In other areas, there should be more non-negotiables as far as the work that you're involved in. And so let's say, for instance, that you committed at the beginning of this year to be involved in a care team. Well, when that care team is meeting, if at all possible, you ought to be there. Or if you have a teenager that's in the youth group and there's a youth activity and you have that night free to spend time with your family, the entire family should go to that youth activity. I think one of the areas that we really fail our kids is whenever there's a youth activity, we take them and drop them off and go spend time doing what we want to. Those can be family activities, not every time, but at least some of the time. It's not the youth minister's job or the elder's job or the preacher's job to raise anybody's kids. The same way it's not the daycare's job or the school's job, it's our job. So we've got to find those work areas where we fit in, but we can't always do every single thing. And so we've got to find that balance. Last week, there was a preacher that some of you are probably familiar with and some of you probably have never heard of, named Tom Holland. Tom was in his late 80s, maybe even his early 90s, and he passed away last week. He'd been sick for the last several years. Tom, for some 30 years, was the director of the Nashville School of Preaching. Tom was the founder and coordinator, and up until I think 2 years ago, every year had been participating in the Diana singing up near Nashville. And I've been to that singing several times, and it's a lot of fun. You stay up all night just singing praises outside under this makeshift barn. It's a lot of fun. I've heard Tom Holland speak probably a dozen times at least at Polishing the Pulpit and gospel meetings and lectureships. And one thing I always noticed about him, and I don't want to say anything bad about him, because he was a wonderful Christian man, but I always noticed that he never had any family with him. And he didn't really ever talk about a wife or children or anything. The last time I ever heard him speak was 3 years ago at Polishing the Pulpit. It was the final session of the whole thing. And it was a session that was designed just for preachers. And he got up and he talked about his family. He talked about the fact that every time his family was on vacation somewhere, it was scheduled around a gospel meeting. And he talked about the fact that when his kids were on spring break and when they had holidays, he was usually off in another place doing a gospel meeting or teaching a class at the School of Preaching or doing something that in and of itself was really good. But he said he missed the opportunity to raise his family. And because of the resentment for that, his wife left him and they lived separated. And he had a strained relationship with his children because he failed to balance the idea of preaching and teaching and doing all these things that are really good with giving the proper time and attention to his family. And I want to tell you, during that whole lecture, I was just squeezing my fists like this because I felt like in a lot of ways he was telling the story of myself and lots of other preachers who feel like that's their responsibility. And so we have to learn that balance because we can do a lot of wonderful things that we think are good things, but if we neglect our family in doing that, then we've missed the point. If we go to heaven and we were so worried about us getting there that we forgot to get our family there with us, then we missed the whole point of what the Bible teaches us about having a family to begin with. So there has to be that balance. So God is first, and our family is first, and then here is something that's going to sound countercultural and revolutionary and heretical to some of you, but everything else that doesn't have to do with God or our family comes last. I know as men, we're really guilty of saying, well, I know that I've got church things and I know I've got my family, but I've just got to get away and play my 3 rounds of golf every week. If that's your attitude, I hope that you hit it in the water every single time that you tee off, because that's the wrong attitude. Do we deserve a little time for ourselves every now and then? Yes. But ask your wife permission first. We have things that we really, really enjoy that are really, really good. And I think that a healthy relationship, husband and wife and children, they come together and they allow for that time because we need our time by ourselves. If I don't get a little bit of time by myself every now and then, I'll really be grumpy and cranky because we need that time to recharge and reboot ourselves. But my personal time, your personal time, is a distant second to your time with God and your time with your family. And until we can figure that out and understand that, we're going to be constantly battling what's most important. Everything else is last. Because everything else is secondary. I've never heard a person, when they find out they have a cancer diagnosis, saying, if I'd have just played a couple more rounds of golf. Tim McGraw came out with a song that you may remember several years ago called Live Like You Were Dying. He says, I went skydiving and Rocky Mountain climbing and rode a bull and all that, and that was kind of my thought. What a bunch of bull. If I found out that I only had a little bit of time left, I would sit and hold my daughter until my dying breath. Because that's what matters. And so, God is first, our family is first, and everything else is last. I started off by telling you about this song, Time in a Bottle. It actually didn't come out until 1972. It was in a TV movie that ABC had on. It used to be really popular that TV stations would come out with their own movies and they would show them on Saturday night and they'd be popular. And Time in a Bottle was featured in a movie. And it wasn't even supposed to be a single, but because of how popular it was, it became a song that people wanted to hear on the radio. And so you can imagine Jim Croce sitting with his 2-year-old little boy and listening to that song and feeling like he had it figured out and that he had his whole life ahead of him. 29 years old at that point, and just, man, starting to get a music career, and things are going great. And I tell you, we have our whole lives planned out for our children, where they're going to go to school, and what they're going to do, and where they're going to live. And families are great. There's some of you that have your entire family that lives within just a little bitty distance of you, and I'm really jealous of that. I tell Carl all the time how much I miss our families because we don't get to spend time with them. But we've got it figured out that we've got that time that we can spend, and it's going to be great. And in 1973, just the next year, Jim Croce was playing a concert in a little bitty town in Louisiana. And as they got ready to leave, the pilot missed his car to the airport, or his bus or limo, whatever he was taking. And the pilot, who was 57 years old and had a history of heart problem, actually ran 3 miles to get to the airport so that he could be there to fly the plane on time. And it was a pretty foggy evening, and so as they took off with 30-year-old Jim Croce, with a 2-year-old son at home, having just released Time in a Bottle, and with another song called I've Got a Name coming out the very next day, they took off, and at the end of the runway there was a pecan tree. And that airplane hit that pecan tree, and they crashed, and all 5 people on board, including Jim Croce, died. Raise your hand if you're in your 30s right now. Some of you are closer to your 40s than your 30s, but that's okay. Imagine your life being over today. And imagine all the things that you've left undone, all the time you've wasted. I want to challenge you this morning to take the time and put it in a bottle. And not that you can save it forever, and not that you can fix it, not that you can undo anything, not that you can bend time, but you can focus on the things that matter the most and spend the rest of your life focusing on those. Because eternity will be time in a bottle. That's why in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the wisest man to ever live wrote that time itself is meaningless and vanity, and it's not how God operates. But God has set eternity in the human heart so that we can do what we want to do, which is spend time with our God, spend time with our family, and praise Him around His throne forever. Or if we don't spend time doing what we ought to do in this life, we can lose that forever. Andrew said something in his lesson that I thought was really good. He said that here's the thing about failure as it relates to time. It's not final and it's not fatal. It can be corrected while we're still here. So if you're here this morning and you have failed in prioritizing the right things, come forward and show us publicly this morning, and show your family and show God that you want to do better, that you want to correct it. If there's sin in your life that you need to get rid of, public or private, come and confess it this morning so you can start anew. And if you're not a Christian this morning, there's no way to say that God is the first priority in your life because you haven't made Him a priority at all. Maybe you're feeling like you're too young, or that you're not good enough yet, or that you haven't thought it all the way through. Whatever is holding you back, understand this. God has given His Son, as Rob mentioned this morning, because He loved us so much. He's given us that chance to have a relationship with him through Christ. The sacrifice has been done. The work has been done. If you know the plan of salvation, the time is now to act on that. Don't waste any more time as we stand and as we sing.